hopefully that works. Hard to say. Okay, we are here. We are live. Fantastic. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Homewood Ends, the channel on history and board games. As you may have noticed, it's not Fred today. Sorry, everybody in the comments who's come hoping for some French person, but like across history, the English have invaded, and sadly, I'm here instead. Today, we're going to be covering something really interesting, something I'm really excited for. And we are joined by the design team behind it. So everybody say hello to Gonzalo and Grace and Will as well. Say hi, guys.
Hey guys, how you guys doing? We're excited.
So we're going to be talking about their game, which I've already said this behind the stage, but my pronunciation is terrible. But I'm going to attempt Nawalli.
Yes, like perfect.
Which came out in 2022, if I'm correct. So early 2023.
Yeah, like we launched the Kickstarter 2022, and then it officially arrived in people's houses in mid 2023.
And it's a game inspired by Aztec mythology and Aztec culture. Because the studio, how do we pronounce the studio's name again? Studio
Tequanis.
Tequanis, yes. So the studio is co-founded by you guys. So if we could go around first with you, Gonzalo, and you and everyone just kind of say what their part is in the studio.
Yeah, for sure. I am the lead artist and I guess designer. I am obsessed with Aztec mythology and culture, and I'm also an illustrator. And so my part in Nawalli was I came up with the prototype for this. I was like, well, why do we have all these card games, but none about, Aztec mythology? There's all these other variants. And so that just kind of sparked the idea. And I brought it to my friends as well as showed it to my partner, Grace. And then they got involved, and I'll let them share what they've done with the project since.
Yeah, Grace, do you want to continue?
Yeah, so I am another artist, and we've been making art together for
almost 10 years.
11 years now, I think.
Okay.
11 years of making art.
And what did you do for the game?
For the game, I did edits and art.
Yeah, so she colored all the beautiful colors. She made sure that they were just spot on.
And she does the layouts for the cards as well. Like when we're exporting the cards, she'll do the layouts and
yes,
all
yeah, all of that. She made sure that everything is good. She has a really good eye for making sure everything's just, when it's going to print, that it's going to come out right.
And yeah, the colors are really inspired. Will, do you want to talk about kind of your input in the studio?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll also add Grace is a great video editor. She's been doing our videos for us, and she's been designing products for the store, and so she's been doing great on that stuff.
She was good at live stream. She could have helped me with this as well. That would have been
handy.
Yeah. So my role on the project, Gonzalo, like he said, he brought the game to me and said, "What do you think of it?" And I said, "It looks awesome. Let's work on it." And so I've just been helping him to develop the game itself, the rules, the mechanics. I've helped on a lot of different aspects, like just giving, feedback on the art when they bring it to me and things like that as well. But I tend to focus more on the game design side of things, especially the numbers and the balancing to make sure that everything plays well as looking good. And then also I've been working on the production side of things, talking with our manufacturers, nailing down all the different details, just making sure that we can actually run this business successfully and get the products into people's hands, and that when it gets there, it's going to be something that they can play for a long time and it's going to hold up over time.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great insight, and we'll touch on that later because that's something I'm really interested in.
Yeah.
But firstly, I wanted to ask kind of whether there was a particular moment, perhaps for you, Gonzalo, where you had kind of that moment where you were saying, hey, I want to make this studio, I want to make this collective, and I want to kind of push for more Aztec culture to be kind of more arts to be kind of consumed?
So honestly, it's interesting. What started Tequani's was I've actually been working on an Aztec fantasy graphic novel that was picked up by a publisher. That's kind of my main project. And however, I ran out of funding and I had to figure out, what am I going to do to be able to not only fund my work on this book. And so I came up with this idea of a card game because I was playing a lot of card games at the time to kind of, have fun when I'm not working on the book. And I've always played card games and stuff. But in particular, I just started realizing like why there isn't, why do more people know like Pikachu and all these other things? Because like as I was making that graphic novel, I was learning more about Aztec mythology, right? To make the book. And I was just like, why aren't any of these characters in any video game or any card game or anything? And so, yeah, at some point I think I was playing some mobile card game and I was like, oh, this is cool. Yeah, and I really liked this mobile card game. It was simple. It was kind of a lane battler. And I was just like obsessed with the day signs, like the Aztec Zodiac, you could call it. There's 20 signs, each giving a sort of power. And it just had this sort of gamified idea around it. Like, oh, the Jaguar gives you Jaguar powers. So what if that symbol was on a card and then that card now has Jaguar power? And so then I just came up with a tiny prototype of different cards with different abilities and just some basic stats and tried to kind of play like some sort of battle game with them. And that's kind of when I brought it to Will and showed it to Grace as well and was like, hey, what do you guys think of this? And I just kind of, honestly, I drew on a piece of paper and put it in like a magic sleeve. I just put like a sleeve with a magic card and put the paper in front of it. And yeah, so that was kind of the inception, I would say, of that idea.
I definitely think that's like a playtesting kind of experience that many people in the audience will kind of resonate with. Like gluing pieces of paper to a card and just kind of playing it out. It doesn't work, and then like scribbling it out and like trying something new, every single time.
Right.
That's really interesting. One of the things I wanted to ask off the back of that was kind of if there was any other similar contemporaries who you kind of looked up to in terms of kind of promoting Aztec culture accurately, because I think there is a lot of kind of depictions of kind of Mesoamerican or like Central American historic cultures, but whether they're kind of accurate or not is kind of a different story, I guess.
Yeah, I found that at least now, like Teotihuacan and some other ones are doing a good job at being a bit more, I guess, authentic in some ways. But as far as a contemporary project that showed Aztec culture in a sort of, I guess, authentic way, it's really hard to find many. It would be like, less than a handful. And, honestly, the inception of my entire inspiration was a video game called Guacamelee. Maybe you've heard of it. It's like a Metroid.
Yeah.
And it was the first video game that felt like it was targeted for me as a Mexican American. Like I was like, oh my God, I'm like in these Aztec temples and fighting like Mexican and Aztec stuff. And that was kind of sort of the first thing that I experienced. And then that just kind of led to, I guess, Nawalli at some point. Because I started, looking at the Pokemon and all these things where there's a creature. It's based around creatures. But a contemporary, I hate to say that I didn't have a direct one that I was like, oh, Aztec game, I want to make one too. I don't think that I can recall one.
So in terms of kind of that first initial like game and kind of being inspired by another lane battler, maybe Will can touch on this as well. What part kind of the game did you say, oh, that's the bit that makes this Nawalli, that's the thing that makes the character, the rabbit, character, the rabbit character, rather than just there being kind of, the theme versus the kind of the game. How do those connect?
Yeah, Gonzalo put a ton of work into making sure that the gameplay and the theme line up. And that's been a big challenge during development, actually balancing like what would play better in the game versus like what is going to be the most lore accurate. For example, like the abilities that we give to different characters, right? Because each character in the Aztec lore has its own sign that's associated with it already. So if we want to make it historically accurate, we need to go with those signs, right? Whereas sometimes that doesn't necessarily make the character like the strongest that it could be. So then we kind of adjust the stats to fit with what abilities it actually has or has to have based on the lore to kind of balance both, so it plays well and it has these certain abilities. Like, okay, because of the lore, we have to give this creature rain, but you know, we can change the stats, the other stats a little bit to make that actually play well in the game too.
Yeah,
Right.
one of the things I wanted to ask was, it kind of seems like when I'm playing, you've got all these kind of little cute boys and little cute fellas, and they're really weak, you know? And then it's always the guys who look like this who are kind of messing me up, you know, kind of was there a sense, Grace, when you were kind of making the art? I know it's very inspired, you know, guys, people will see on the Kickstarter, inspired by real art. But was there a sense of kind of knowing that a card was kind of stronger and going to make it kind of more fearsome, or is that just kind of incepted through the theme and therefore through the gameplay and it helped the art? What was that like?
Honestly, I feel like we went through a lot of back and forth on those as well. Like, you know, we wanted to have little cute guys, but then we're like, well, we can't. He's not gonna really stand up that strong against this guy. Like, so.
Right. The big monsters, we kind of said, okay, the big monsters are going to have the higher energy costs, the more powerful kind of epic creatures and gods and things. Those will cost more energy, but they're not necessarily just going to be flat out better because of the math on the stats. Like those lower energy cost cards are more efficient. You get more stats per point of energy the lower in the energy curve that you are. So as you go up the energy curve, the absolute power of the cards goes up, but the relative power for the energy that you're spending curves downward slightly, or the curve, you know, flattens a little bit, rounds down. So the idea is that those will kind of supplement the big creatures. You'll kind of start by putting these small ones out and then shapeshift them into the bigger creatures as the game progresses, and you get more energy over time.
And if you had to kind of, because I'm kind of conscious that we haven't really gone over kind of what the gameplay is. This isn't a teach and play. We won't be playing the game today, unfortunately. But maybe in the future, after the Kickstarter hopefully successfully launches, I'd love to have you guys back on and play again. Could you give kind of like a 45-second, Will, explanation of kind of what the game is, gameplay-wise? We're talking mechanics here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the inspiration was for me, like the drafting was a big part of this game because I started playing Magic the Gathering with my friend who had a huge stash of cards. I didn't have a lot of money to buy a bunch of cards, so we would just make decks casually out of this pool of cards, like a draft box that he had, and that was super fun. And so when Gonzalo brought the game to me, I said we should make it like a drafting type of game, right? Because you play with this pool of cards. And so the main idea is you've got these 4 lanes. You draft your cards before you start the game. It's a quick like 5-minute draft because there's not many cards in the deck. And then you combine those cards together to try and take all of the tonali gems. We have 13 gems in the middle of the board that you're fighting over and kind of a tug of war back and forth. So that was one of the conventions we wanted to change. You don't just have like a certain amount of life, but you're trying to vie for these gems. So it lets the game go back and forth. And then we introduced mechanics like shape shifting and guardian blessing and things like that. So the main idea is you draft these creatures, you play them into the lanes, you try and attack with them and use their abilities to take those tonali points. And then you can combine them together to do a whole bunch of different unique strategies with how the abilities combine with each other.
Yeah, so there's kind of it's kind of in many ways very similar to lots of other kind of dueling games that people will have played before, except everything's included in the box,
right?
And so there's no booster packs or anything like this,
right. And we're going to do expansion decks later, but we're going to keep everything accessible to where you don't have to fish by buying hundreds of booster packs to try and get the good ones. The all of the power level of all the cards is according to like how much energy they cost. So every card should be equally strong for however much energy it costs in theory.
Right.
Keep going.
To add to that, you were asking earlier about the how do we choose what stats a certain cards have, Every card in each level has one of 3 different stats. There's either what we call the defender stats, where it has more life than attack. Then there's the all-rounder, which is sort of balanced. It has a decent amount of both. And then there's the attacker, which has more attack but less health. And so we kind of sort of in the meta of the game thought about each card. Is it an attacker, defender, or all-rounder? And then every card in the game within the levels will always be one of those 3 stats. So that means, like, I don't know, a card that we release 6 years from now or something will still be as a level 4. If it's an attacker, it's still going to be 5 attack and 4 life. And that was just, you know, Will was kind of the brains behind the numbers. And that's something that really, I feel, made the game solid as a game that feels skill-based, because everything was just so fine-tuned.
We got it most of the way there just through intuition, through playtesting with the paper prototypes. But then there was a certain point where we felt like something is just still quite not there. And that's when I made the spreadsheets and I mapped out, okay, you know, like the math of it all. Like we gave each stat on the card a equivalent value to life. So life equivalent points is what we use to balance the game. Each thing on the card has a certain amount of value in terms of life, which is the common denominator. And that allowed us to balance the cards. And then we can adjust like that total amount of points if we think that's out of whack. But that got us like the last 10-20% to where it's really solid. And, you know, we just identified, okay, the curve kind of dips here. Let's flatten it out. It goes up too high here. Let's flatten that out. And then we got to our stat system and it felt really good after that.
Right. He's like the math magician, and then I'm like the art magician, and then Grace is kind of like the color magician, and then we just kind of make this, you know.
So yeah, speaking on kind of Grace's impact, one of the things that I really enjoyed about the game, because you're trying to educate, right, is the kind of flavor art on each Nawal. Was there sometimes kind of an issue with kind of making that text, like on this card, for example, fit in there, Grace? Was it difficult, or?
There will be times where I'm like, Gonzalo, this will not all fit in there. We need to cut this down. And he's like, what about this? And then I'm like, how about this one right here?
Right. That was a difficult thing to. I tried to follow the lore. I like lore on like Magic the Gathering cards and stuff, and I wanted to follow the lore, but I use Nawat writing or expression, which it's called like a. I forgot the actual word, but it's like a double. Like they say the same thing twice, but in different ways. So like
So like this one says the bear Nawal, the mountain beast.
Exactly. And so that is a convention in Nawat speak or Nawat language that I thought was unique, because sometimes the second sort of phrase would be more metaphorical or abstract, and then you connect the two things.
Maybe that's where Pokemon got that from, really, because it's quite in Pokemon as well. They'll always say, you know, I don't know, I'm not a very big Pokemon fan, but they'll say something and then you'll be like, oh, cool. And they'll be like, the bunny Pokemon. And you'll be like, what? Why don't you just call it the bunny Pokemon?
Right.
Yeah, maybe that's where they got it.
That's exactly, honestly, why I went with the raccoon Nawal. The Nawal.
Oh, yeah. He's so
raccoon
cool.
Nawal. The Nawal word is essentially my Pokemon word, except it's a real thing.
Oh, I want to find him now. He's so cute. He looks like a little kind of bandit or something.
Yeah, we had a lot of people posting him holding the knife on our Discord, and that became kind of a meme. I think we actually made an icon of him.
Yeah, Grace made a icon and emoji with him holding the knife.
Because he's got Monkey, he can equip the knife for free because it only costs 1. Monkey reduces the cost of items by 1. So if you have the knife, you can just put it on him for free. He just kind of always comes with the knife.
People have got to see this. Where is he?
He's ready to swipe.
Look at him. It's this fella, isn't it?
Yes.
And a furry thief. Yeah, he's so cool. I love all the ones that have like one energy. I just want a full deck of those guys. Sometimes,
Thank
you know,
you.
even though I'll lose.
I mean, it might be viable. It'd be kind of like a goblin rush deck in Magic,
Yeah.
where you have all the little one-cost goblins, and you get them out very quickly because, like I said, the actual power you get per energy is very high on the ones.
Eight raccoons and 8 knives, and then you just every raccoon gets a free knife, right? But something that I thought you might find interesting is all the lore on the cards. I actually looked at the Florentine Codex, which is an ethnobiography encyclopedia that a priest made of the Aztec people. He actually interviewed people and wrote all this down in this book. And in that book, he wrote descriptions of each animal in the Aztec kingdom. And so a lot of the lore found on the cards are direct words that were written in this book, both in Nahuatl by Nahuatl people who had to learn Latin alphabet to write down the Nahuatl. That's why sometimes when you see Nahuatl online, it's like, whoa, this looks really long and complicated. Well, that's because it's not using a native alphabet. It's using like an alphabet that wasn't made for that language. But yeah, so language nerds might like that.
Yeah, and you guys, are you originally from Texas, or that's at least where you live now, if I'm correct? Is that kind of that being kind of such a kind of melting pot of different cultures, as I understand, having literally never been to America? That, you know, the colonization of kind of those people in Central America, was that one of the reasons as well that you wanted to kind of shine a light on the culture?
Oh, for sure. Like the Southwest, Texas, California, that was actually a part of Mexico back in the 1800s. And so Mexican people have been, and the Aztecs actually came from Aztlan, which is supposedly in the Southwest. So essentially back in 900, the Aztecs lived in the Southwest, moved to Central Mexico. And so we've been here this entire time. And so a lot of the words we use in English, like tomato, that comes from tomat, which is Nahuatl, or chocolate, or, you know, all of those words come from Nahuatl. So yeah, it's like we use Nahuatl every day without realizing it. And that was kind of a big reason. I was like, hey, my ancestors used, you know, this was the language they spoke. But now modern Mexican Americans and Mexican speak Spanish because of colonization. People were forced to convert and not speak Nahuatl. But luckily, Nahuatl communities continued, and Nahuatl is still spoken to this day by over 2 million people. And so I'm just trying to relearn that language that I didn't get to grow up with because of colonization. That's
really interesting. One of the questions kind of on that, if someone who's kind of over the last couple of years kind of been learning so much about the Aztec culture, if people wanted to learn more, what are kind of the best places you think they could go for that in any form of media?
Yeah, my 2 number 1 sources that I tell people is, one is a book called The Daily Life of the Aztecs. It is essentially a encyclopedia that goes through everything that you would want to know, from society to social class to what they did every day. The second thing I would recommend is actually a website from the UK. It's called mexicolor.uk, mexicolor.uk. And they post a lot of articles in a very family-friendly way. So it's like all their pieces are very conversational and interesting to read. And they have a lot of articles on money and mythology, and they do a lot of classroom stuff. So essentially, that's for pretty much anyone to learn. And then the other book is a bit more dense, but probably the best you can find.
Okay, so those are good starting points.
Yes, those 2, I would say.
I wanted to touch kind of a little bit more on something Will alluded to at the start, which is kind of the fact of being quite a young studio and kind of tackling kind of a board game as kind of your first project. It's quite a mammoth task. Or maybe it's not your first project. Is it the first kind of major project?
It's the first board game I've ever worked on, but you know, Gonzalo, he worked on a video game. He could probably talk more about that.
Yeah, I made a video game in 2017 with a couple of friends called Borders, and it's an indie game you can find on
Oh
itch.io,
yeah, yeah.
and it's about a basically it's about my parents' immigration story, and you essentially are a character trying to cross into the U.S. Mexican border. My parents and other family members experienced that trek through the desert, and in the game, kind of like Dark Souls, every time you die, it leaves a skeleton. And so if you play it again, you do another run because you lost. You'll see skeletons, and I made this game and I showed it in person to kind of try to say something about the immigration issue. So that was my previous game project that kind of launched. But this was my first board game project.
So from a logistics standpoint, has that been kind of difficult because you're trying to balance the kind of artistic vision, versus kind of the practicalities of really kind of producing, a product, shipping it to people, making sure, like Will mentioned, like it's balanced, and it's not just cards that people can look at, this type of thing.
Will honestly was very crucial to making sure that it was something that was producible, because as an artist, I want to make it like the craziest best thing, but then production, manufacturing, and like, what if it comes with this? And it's like, okay, well, that'll be the cost of the entire thing, and no one will be able to get the game. Stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, it was an interesting journey to, be the artist and design it, because ultimately I love being a game designer and an artist. But the production side of things was a whole nother experience that, luckily I had Will and Grace to learn alongside me.
Yeah. So from your perspective, Will, given that you kind of what you alluded to at the start, what's kind of been the biggest challenges in terms of getting in contact with kind of manufacturers, distributors, all this type of, all this type of stuff, prototyping, that type of stuff? That's right. Something that's kind of insane to do, kind of essentially as a solo studio,
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. Like Gonzalo said, it's been a learning experience. There's just so many little details that you don't even think about when you go to get it published. Like, I'd say one of the biggest difficulties in publishing it would particularly be the colors. Grace and Gonzalo are very particular about the colors. Grace has an insane eye for color, and she'll notice just like slight differences in the shades of colors that like most people wouldn't even notice. But then when you look at it for a bit, it's like, oh, wow, she's right. I don't even know how she saw that. So that's been really helpful. But it's been a back and forth where, we have them prepare something and send us a sample or show us pictures of it. And then we say, well, that's not quite right. We need to adjust it this way. And just because transferring digital images to paper prints is not as straightforward as people think, that's actually immensely difficult to get that right, as well as the texture of the cards, the finish of the cards, the materials that everything is made out of, right? Like all of those things have to be specified. And when you're going to a factory, they're not necessarily going to have all of those details that are part of your vision in mind. And so it takes a lot of attention to detail and a lot of back and forth to be able to get that stuff right. And so as far as production goes, I'd say that was probably the biggest challenge. It was a lot of work on other things like, preparing the Kickstarter and everything else. But like the actual making of the game, that was the hardest part, I'd say, was like getting the colors and materials right and making sure like what they're sending us is actually what our vision for the game is.
So it sounds like, Grace, you're busting Will's balls when he shows you a terrible card with not the right colors.
Yeah,
accurate?
I show them something and they're like, "Oh no, this is so bad. We have to fix it." I'm like, "Don't worry. We're gonna go through the process some more."
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, what's that communication like with kind of the factories that you're working with, Will? Where are they trying to show you stuff and kind of be like, yeah, it's fine. Like,
yeah,
you can totally use this, and you're kind of like, not really.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have to point out, like, provide documentation of like all of those little details, how we want them versus how they've actually sent them to us to communicate that accurately to them.
Right. It's sort of like the meme of wish.com where it's like
maybe Temu now.
Right. Or Temu. Yeah, you're like, okay, that looks good. And then it arrives and you're like, I don't know if that's what I asked for.
Yeah.
Let's try
Maybe
that
they
again.
gave you like the best one of the 20 that they made, right? The
Right.
best possible one, and then when they give
Right.
you a pack, it's not the standard that you expected.
Yeah,
So,
so we don't want
on
to
that,
send that to our customers. So we work really hard to make sure that it's
Right.
solid, that we can be proud
So,
of what we're sending.
yeah, what are some of the improvements that have kind of been made and changed from the first edition and the second edition, from a gameplay aspect, but also from kind of a production aspect as well?
Okay, yeah, we can split this up a bit. So the gameplay aspect to start with, one of the biggest things I would say for me has been the rule book. And specifically, we just honed in the production of the rule book. A lot of people would say that maybe the rule book wasn't the most clear. Maybe it was a little vague because we didn't have enough pages. And so this time around, I redid and upgraded the rulebook. So now we have graphs and imagery for each step so that you can have examples. And
That
we
took
did
so much work to do the rule books, by the way. Like as far as making the game, the rules and the rule book in particular were just monumental. Like we had no idea how hard that would be to make it
that
short
was
and
the
concise
hardest.
and convey everything we needed to.
Yeah.
That was the hardest part of making a game.
It's easy when you're there to teach someone the game,
Yeah.
right? And then as soon as you have to leave someone in a room with a piece of paper and figure it out, it's a very
Right.
different experience.
Right.
Especially when you're like, I don't know, the game is this big. I have big hands, but you know, it all has to fit in here. And so, yeah, that's, you know, over 100 cards, you know, all these tokens as well. They're made of stone, they're made of glass, you know.
Right.
All the sheets as well that you use. Working on a small form factor like this must have been incredibly difficult.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, millimeters. We are talking millimeters, like making sure, you know, the measurements are just by a millimeter. If it was too little or too much, it wouldn't fit. And so,
Yeah.
and speaking of, like, Will, if you want to talk about the new changes that we made that affect
Yeah.
the gameplay, like
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
stats.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, we updated the rulebook. That was a big part of it. We've added colored symbols to all of the cards as well. That was an improvement. That's both gameplay and art, because I was pushing for colored symbols for a long time, and I'm glad we finally did it. But I think it makes it look a lot. It's a lot easier to recognize like what symbol that you're looking at. There's a lot in the human mind that you know, colors are connected to memory and identifying specific things much more quickly than if you didn't have the color. So that's going to help with when you're looking at the board state, being able to read the board state more quickly, because the symbols are not just white with different shapes, they're different colors as well. And so I feel like that's both a gameplay improvement and an art improvement. As far as the stats go, we changed 20 of the cards stats to better fit what abilities they had. We were mostly happy with the abilities that they had. I think we changed a couple of cards' abilities to fit a little better, like the double-headed snake. We gave it death ability because instead of read, because I thought we thought it should like strike back whenever you attack it. The death ability would be like a strike back from the second head. So there was some thematic changes to the abilities like that. But most of the changes to the stats were more like, okay, we like these abilities, but we think it would play better with this certain stat block over here. Like, for example, the Hurricane had an attacker stat block, and the Hurricane has a wind ability that can push people around, and then it has the Quake ability that does damage when things move in front of it. So as an attacker, you could put it out and do a lot of damage with those abilities, but it wouldn't really have staying power to activate its abilities multiple times because it didn't have very much health. You'd have to give it some sort of protection for it to sit on the board and make use of those abilities. So we moved that to an all-rounder stat block because we still wanted it to have a powerful attack, but now that it has a bit more life, instead of just all-out attack, it can sit on the board more and kind of over time use those abilities multiple times and get more value out of them. So mainly buffing the cards to that we felt maybe the stat blocks were not quite as good as they could be. Most of the cards we felt like, you know, the stat blocks and abilities were good, but then we kind of identified the 20 cards that maybe were kind of lackluster before because the stat blocks didn't fit the abilities and the gameplay so much, and adjusted that.
Yes, and in the base game, the first edition, sorry, there was so the game is kind of mostly a two-player game, kind of 1v1, but there was a free-player free-for-all and then a team-based 2v2. Now that's changed in the second edition, as far as I'm aware. What's changed about that?
Yeah, so we now have figured out 4-player mode. So you can now, we are the first, well, maybe not the first. We are now able to battle 4 Nawali independent of each other on the battlefield. 4-player free for all, which we came to the conclusion that 3 and 4-player free for all we needed to do was remove one of the tonali gems from the game. So for a 3-player, you play with 12 gems, and for a 4-player, you play with 11 gems. And it is perfectly fine-tuned because, you know, we were worried that it would drag out because it's like, oh, there's always 1 gem left because there's so many players. But by removing that gem, it actually kept the game about the same pace, but now you can have more players.
And on top of that as well, there's an adventure mode, right? Do you want to tell us more about that?
Yeah, so the adventure mode was a stretch goal that we really wanted for the first edition, and we fulfilled it, luckily. We have created an adventure mode where you or a friend can both create and choose your starter. So this is like going back to the Pokemon days. You choose 2 Nawals, 2 spells, and you go through a series of 5 battles that get consecutively harder. And the goal is either to defeat all of the waves of creatures or to defeat the sorcerer by taking all the tonali, just like in the base game. We came up with the rules. You now use 3 lanes. So you have a back lane that moves forward, and then it fills up so you know what's coming next.
And
So
kind of like an auto battler of some kind, if it was compared to like a video game.
sort of like an auto battler, exactly. And honestly, it really opens up a whole new way to play the game because, again, you can play it by yourself, and it's almost like a puzzle. It's like, okay, here's my limited resources. I only have 2 creatures and 2 spells, and I have sort of more creatures than you probably could handle. And it's all about playing those cards right to be able to defeat that area, that battle. And once you defeat it, you recruit a Nawal and a spell in certain battles until by the end of the game, you have 4 Nawals and 4 spells to defeat the final boss. And Will, if there's anything I missed that you want to add.
No, I think you covered the main thing. We also added kind of a scaling difficulty to that one because there's a drastic difference in the skill that different players have, and we want it to be fun for everyone. So the base game doesn't have anything except for the blessing, right? That's in the base difficulty. Yeah. So you add a blessing from whichever guardian is chosen to fight against. Every round they'll add this extra ability to one of the creatures, and it keeps coming back out. But then we also added shape-shifted cards for higher difficulty, so you can play the base game where it's a good difficulty, not too incredibly brutal, or you can add shape-shifted creatures that keep coming back out to add more abilities to other cards. So if you feel like, okay, I'm really good, I've beat the base, okay, try it with 1 shapeshift, try it with 2. It's kind of like in there's some other co-op board games that we played. There's a temple one where you're trying to grab all 4 of the
I know what you're on. Yeah,
the relics from the temple, the sunken temple or something. I wish I could remember the name, but the tiles are falling and you have to try and grab these trophies before all the tiles fall and you die and then get out with the trophies. So like to raise the difficulty, you're basically putting more cards out each round for the tiles to sink, so they sink faster. So it was the difficulty was kind of inspired by that sort of mechanic in other co-op games that we played.
Yeah, and shapeshifting in the game is basically this way to kind of buff a Nawal by applying another Nawal's unique abilities to it without any of the extra stuff, right?
Right.
So you might have 2 cards on top of each other like that, and then you get the ability of the rabbit on top of the ability of the monkey.
Right,
Exactly.
And it also gives it a +1 to power and life, so it's just kind of base stats are stronger from that as well.
Right. And to add just like a thing, I was super inspired by, I would say, Inscription. If you played that card game, I was almost thinking, how can I bring something like Inscription into a physical space? And so that was kind of one of my biggest inspirations for that solo adventure mode.
And funny enough, after we made Nawali, someone told us, "Wow, have you seen Inscription? This looks so cool. I love Inscription." And we said, "No, let's look it up." And then I actually bought Inscription after that and played it, and I loved it. And I was surprised, just like kind of how on the same vibe it was as far as you know, taking small creatures, combining them together to make bigger, more powerful creatures, and then battling in these lanes.
Right, right. It was just like at the same time there was another game that was using glyphs and sort of similar mechanics, and yeah, that was awesome to have found that.
I have a question for you, Grace, in terms of the colors. A lot of kind of these Aztec kind of colors, you know, you're getting these rich greens and these lovely kind of reds and blues. Do you ever get bored of that? Are you like, come on, give me an orange? Or there's a bit of orange in here, to be fair, but maybe purple, you know, or something like this.
No, I love it. In fact, look how worn out this book is.
Oh, that was amazing.
So this book is
Here's the other half.
falling apart, but this is you could say the
Here's the other half.
oh, here's the other half. So this is one of my favorite codexes. It's called the Codex Borgia, and the imagery in here is just phenomenal.
So I get a lot of my color references.
Right. So I have used this liberally, as you can see. And so what we did was
Nawalli.
we came up with a palette based on what pigments were available in the codexes at the time to try to replicate sort of, you know, if this almost make it look like it came from that time.
Yeah.
Because we're only using this a limited palette.
Yeah.
And luckily, Grace hasn't gotten bored.
No, I love it.
That's good. One other question I was wondering is, you know, you're very inspired by video games and board games as well, but how, I mean, other than kind of the ones you've already mentioned, how big into kind of the whole board game space, as you see, I've got tons. Were you kind of before creating the game, and kind of have you kind of explored more of that as a result of kind of playing the game?
So yeah, I actually been playing board games for quite a while. One of my favorite board games that I bought was the Dark Souls board game. I got that when it was on Kickstarter. I love the Dark Souls board game. It's like a little war game battle, basically recreating Dark Souls. I like Carcassonne. I really love Carcassonne. It's just a simple, fun tile placement.
Yeah.
And I've always played card games. I used to play things like Munchkin. And other games that you probably, you know, Flux and kind of these simpler things. But then I started delving more and more into complicated things. I actually recently got Hero Quest.
Yeah.
And because I'm sort of getting into D&D and RPG stuff.
Yeah, there's tons of stuff to explore in that type
Yeah,
of
and so
miniature.
Oh yeah. The only problem is it's an expensive hobby. And I just that's all I want is to be able to afford this amazing expensive hobby. So that's why slowly but surely I'll be growing it.
Yeah, it is pricey, especially if you want to get into kind of miniatures and stuff, which is the advantage of a game like this, which is kind of essentially all cards, right? That kind of able to use as well.
But
so for me, Dominion and Ascension were two big inspirations.
Yeah, we played that a lot actually.
Like I'm more on the card game side of things, like historically in my past than board games. But I have been playing board games since I was a kid as well. I love board games, but in particular, like the card game board games have always been something I've really liked. So Dominion, I love that because I had played the draft box Magic with my friend before, and I played Pokemon as a kid, and so I love building decks and being able to just build a different deck every time you play was really, really fun. And Ascension as well, how you're building your deck as you play through the game.
I
that
think
was the inspiration for adventure mode in particular.
There's definitely kind of been a resurgence over the last couple of years of kind of these especially dueling games that kind of come pre-constructed as opposed to you know, buying lots of booster packs. And I can think of a couple off the top of my head, but it's really great to see like one that kind of tries to implement its kind of history and culture in such like a concrete way, as opposed to kind of being a bit fluffy and having the mechanics as kind of the main centerpiece. There's a reason kind of the art on these cards is like front and center, and then the other stuff is kind of surrounding it. I guess the final question I kind of would have was kind of what's next for the studio after the Kickstarter, hopefully funds. What's the next big thing on the horizon that each of you kind of have to look forward to?
Yeah. So as you were talking about, you know, card games, like I grew up playing Yu-Gi-Oh! That was my inspiration into art. I remember drawing the Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards in my spiral. and that was kind of my first interaction with like being an artist. And it's crazy to be sitting here and know that I have a card game of my own now. Child me would be so happy. But I, you know, I honestly am bothered that, you know, despite modern gaming, there's still so many people creating, you know, collectible card games with a bunch of booster packs, and it's become a bit more sometimes about the money, right? Like collecting things that are worth a lot of money, and trading, and you know, unfortunately, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic inherently had that from the very beginning. So what I wanted to do with Nawalli was, from the very beginning, it is not about, do you have the money to buy the strongest card? And so moving forward, what we want is to create the rest of the pantheon. I have 20 Teots, 20 Guardians decks that I have planned out, because there's 20 Aztec day signs, and each day sign has sort of a patron god. So the box set comes with 5, and we've released a few as promos, but essentially the future is to release these decks every quarter or something, and just kind of build all of these cards that are yet to come out. You know, I'm looking forward to Xochipilli. He is the monkey lord, basically. He gives monkey as his blessing, which is going to be really cool. And yeah, that's her patron.
Yeah.
And so like all of that is just like, oh, there's all these gods with their specific symbol that just aren't out yet, and it all depends on, you know, how it does.
And there's
the
so many
Guardians,
creatures too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so many creatures.
And the Guardians in the game are kind of like if you kind of played Hearthstone or something like this, or kind of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's kind of like it's your hero who you always have kind of passively in the game.
Yes,
right,
exactly. Your Guardian is your hero, and I can't wait to release the rest of the heroes, and just like I said, more creatures. And really, I mean, I know it's a lofty goal, but hopefully have people playing Nawalli all over the world, and have tournaments at some point. Like really just something fun and simple that it's accessible, so that people can come together to play a fun game.
Yeah.
You know?
I'd love for there to be, if we can do a teach and play in the future, that'd be really good. I think with
yeah,
maybe webcams pointing down, we can play kind of in front. That might work maybe if we get the right stream set up. So I'd be really excited to kind of do something like that.
Right. And yeah, if Will or Grace, you want to add anything?
Hopefully a video game in the future as well. We've been talking about creating like a video game version of Nawalli, because a lot of people have asked about that. We think that'd be super fun. So that's definitely something that we're interested in and may do in the future.
Right. In fact, I'll pitch it now. Nawalli, the Aztec Card Game, mobile game with sprites. So when you summon the characters, they're sprites in your phone, and they have an idle animation, and each one will have a unique animation when you send them out to attack and when they die, and all that stuff. I want it to be like Pokemon Coliseum, but Nawalli. So that's one of our stretch goals, actually.
Everybody back the Kickstarter.
That's one of our stretch goals. If we can reach that, I mean, the ceiling is limitless.
So in terms of kind of personal projects, have any of the three of you kind of got stuff coming after this as well?
Well, me and Grace have been working on my Aztec fantasy graphic novel, which is based in the world of Aslan, about this sort of timid Mexican boy who wakes up in the Aztec world and has to connect to the Guardians to save, the world from being destroyed. And so we're finishing the graphic novel by the end of the year. And honestly, to be just frank, the reason we're doing this Kickstarter and this entire thing started was because we need funding to continue surviving, to be able to finish the book. And it'll be published in 2026 with Harper Ally and Harper Collins. It's like a imprint. Okay. And yeah, Ally. Yeah. And so that's kind of my main thing is I want to finish my graphic novel. It's been 7 years, and I think people might like it.
Fantastic. And Will, have you got kind of anything coming up in terms of game design that you're kind of exploring?
No, right now I'm just all in on Nawalli, but I will say I've made some I made a prototype for a modernized Patoli a while back. So that's something that we might work on, after we've done all of the things we want to do with Nawalli, and that's chugging along. I might dig that prototype for Patoli back up. That's an ancient board game in the Aztec world that actually inspired some modern games as well, like Sorry and Parcheesi are based on Patoli, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard of that. There has been kind of a resurgence in that in the board game sphere in terms of people playing kind of the royal game of and I know that there's a publisher as well, Matilda. She kind of made kind of Nordic, traditional Nordic games as well. Those are super cool. They're made in kind of fabric, and then you twist them up and they go in a little ball, so not in boxes. Really cool. I'll send you a link to those things.
Yeah.
Some inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, I have too many ideas. That's my problem. But to be realistic, I have been working on a fantasy Aztec RPG, and I don't want to say too much about it, but that is my next project. Is a fantasy Aztec RPG with different scenarios and playing classes like the Aztec Warrior, the Nawalli, and being able to have like a sort of tactical board game, but Nawalli, but tactical kind of board game with movement and but until then, I have to focus all my energy on Nawalli.
Fantastic. So I think that's a good place to end. Thanks for joining me, guys. Thanks, Will, Gonzalo, and Grace. The Kickstarter, I believe, launches tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yep, 8 a.m. Central Time, United States.
So that'll be like midday-ish, I think, in Europe.
Yes.
At some point. And there's a link in the description for people if you're interested. Like, check it out. Check out the studio's website as well, where they've kind of got some extra kind of t-shirts and prints as well. The prints are amazing. I think I'm going to have to get one of those and pop it on the wall. I have literally nothing. You can see there's nothing on the walls right now.
I can see Nawalli right there. Yeah.
Yes. Where's it? This blown up,
Right.
On there, pretty nice.
We'll have to send you one of the banners, like we have the full promo art.
Oh, when you go to like conventions and stuff.
Or a giant raccoon to stare at you while you sleep.
It's like those what you see in American colleges when they have like the flags, right? On the
right. The Nawalli flag. Hey, that'd
be cool. Fantastic. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching, and check out the Kickstarter going live tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you, Joe. It was great. Appreciate it.
Thank you.